Welcome to In the Margins. I'm your host, Ralph Newell, and today we are excited to have with us Dr. LaNitra Berger, Associate Professor of History and Art History, Director of African and African American Studies Program at George Mason University. And as if that's not enough, she's also the current president of NAFSA, the Association of International Educators. Welcome, Dr. Berger.
Thank you so much, Ralph. It's great to be here.
Yeah. I appreciate you definitely taking the time to be with us. I was looking at your title, and I was like, oh, art history. So I personally love art. So first thing I really wanted to ask you was, who's your favorite artist?
Wow, that's a big question.
I
Who's
know,
my
right?
artist? Well, I think I'm going to have to give a softball answer
Okay.
and say that one of my favorite artists is the artist that I actually wrote my first book about,
Hmm.
and that is Irma Stern. I
Okay.
wrote a book about Irma Stern that was published in 2020. It's called Irma Stern and the Racial Paradox of South African Modern Art, Audacities of Color. And I spent basically my entire adult life researching the history of Irma Stern, her life story, and analyzing her work.
Okay.
And even though Irma Stern has a very checkered past in terms of her relationship to Black South Africans, in terms of the way she thought about race relations, she is such an interesting and very polarizing figure that even though she passed away almost 60 years ago,
Hmm.
her work is still very interesting and relevant to people today. So I spent so much time living in South Africa, working and doing research at her home, interacting with other scholars of Irma Stern's work, working with another generation of Irma Stern scholars,
Mhm.
that I feel like I can't help but think about Irma Stern. Even though my book was published 4 years ago, I still think about Irma Stern every day.
So tell us about your current role at George Mason. I think I really want to hear about the intersection of art history and African American studies. I think obviously definitely dovetails into your book about Irma Stern, but how do you put that together in a classroom, and what exactly is that about?
Yes. So I've been at George Mason University for 14 years.
Okay.
And I came to George Mason after working for NAFIO, the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, with Dr. Leslie Baskerville and Ms. Selena Mindy Singleton. And in those roles, I was helping historically Black colleges and universities internationalize. But while I was doing that work during the day, I was writing my dissertation on Irma Stern at night. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I love doing is teaching. And I missed being in the classroom with students. So after my degree was conferred in 2009, a job came up at George Mason to run the fellowships office. So the Office of Fellowships helps students apply for nationally competitive scholarships and fellowships like the Truman, the Critical Language Scholarship, the Boren Scholarship, and other awards. So I was hired to come to George Mason to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
in that role, I also had the opportunity to teach while I was playing this administrative role.
Right.
And I did that for 12 years. And I loved doing that work because it allowed me to combine my interest in administration and really setting policies that helped students succeed, while
Mm-hmm.
also allowing me to teach and be in the classroom. So right after COVID, though, after having done this role for 10 or 11 years, I realized that it was time for me to go back to the classroom full time as a professor. And I also missed doing research. I missed being out in the field. So I transitioned from running the Office of Fellowships to being tenured faculty in the History and Art History department
Okay.
and running the African and African American Studies program. So I still have some administrative leadership roles on campus in running African and African American Studies, but now my primary responsibilities as a faculty member are to teach and do research.
Okay.
So I'm really happy that George Mason is an institution that is very flexible. It's such a young university that it's really not bound to a lot of rules and traditions. And so people like me with a lot of different interests can find different career pathways at the institution. So in my current role as Director of African and African American Studies, I've been really focused on bringing more curricular opportunities to students. So offering more types of classes in many different disciplines. Both African and African American studies are interdisciplinary fields. So there are people who teach in my program who are political scientists or who are art historians like me or historians. And it's the convergence of those different disciplines that help students learn how to study and understand the Black experience in the diaspora, because they've looked at it from all of these different perspectives, these different disciplinary perspectives. And so my role is to bring those faculty together to make sure that they have the resources and the tools that they need to be successful in the classroom and in their own research, and to make sure that everyone on campus understands the value of African and African American studies to their particular field of study, and that the community understands the value of African and African American studies. George Mason University is located in Fairfax, Virginia. We're about 15 miles outside of downtown Washington, D.C., but we are located in the state of Virginia, where slavery began. So we have a particular obligation to our student population and our community to talk about that experience in the classroom.
So you talked about African and African American studies being interdisciplinary, which it is. So is faculty from other departments weaving some of this into the curriculum? I mean, how are you guys, or does that happen?
Yes, that's how it happens. So we are a very interdisciplinary group of faculty. And so what we're doing is focusing on the Black experience and using our disciplines to analyze the Black experience in different ways. And the primary way that we introduce this to students is through our African American Studies 200 class, which is the introduction to African American Studies. And in this class, we're really trying to open students' minds to thinking about all the disciplines that they may have studied up to that point, but may have never had a Black perspective introduced in that discipline before. They may have taken an English class, but never read a Black author. They may have taken an art history class and never seen work by a Black artist. And so our work in this intro class is to really help them understand the significant, the deep, the creative contributions that people of African descent have made to every field in every part of the world throughout time.
Okay. You talk about George Mason. I don't know if it still is, but I know different years it's been rated as like one of the most diverse campuses, in America. And it is a very diverse institution here in the DC area. But what does George Mason do you think, to create such an inclusive environment for its students?
That's a great question. And that's the answer to that question is why I've been at George Mason University for 14 years. So George Mason University is, as you said, very diverse because it's located in Northern Virginia, which is a diverse part of the state of Virginia. So we're naturally drawing from a diverse population of students of color, students whose families have immigrated to the United States, students of different socioeconomic backgrounds. We attract more and more students from out of state because they see what a great university we are. And so a lot of that diversity comes from people seeing what we're doing at George Mason and wanting to be a part of it. But what's great is not just that we bring a diverse group of students together in the classroom, but that those students have very similar graduation rates. So there's not a lot of variation amongst different socioeconomic groups and ethnic groups in terms of graduation rates at George Mason. So to me and to my colleagues, that demonstrates our commitment to student success regardless of your background. So we have a very extensive advising and coaching structure at George Mason. most of our faculty are very dedicated to students, and you'll find that many students do not fall through the cracks in our classrooms. We are very aware of students and students of concern. So it's hard for a student to have trouble in the classroom and not get noticed, and some attention to understand what their issues are. And many faculty at Mason really teach at Mason because they like this particular student population. They
Mhm.
like having a classroom that has older returning students and veteran students and 18 to 22-year-old students. It's that mixture that really makes the classroom a really vibrant place at George Mason. So all of those things are really important parts of our success as a university. Given that we're only 50 years old, we've really come a long way. But I'll
Mhm.
also say from my own personal research and the work that I do with my colleagues is that we don't shy away from many of the hard questions and issues that colleges and universities are facing today. We really like to confront those and have students talk about those issues in the classroom. So one of the proudest things that we've done at George Mason is the work of my colleagues in the Center for Mason Legacies. They supervised a student research project to look into the history of enslaved people under George Mason, our college's namesake. And
Mhm.
the results of that research, where they went into the archives, they read documents and George Mason's writings, and they spent time at his home called Gunston Hall.
Right.
And the result of that was that they were able to raise money to create a memorial to those enslaved people that's on our campus. And the memorial documents the names of the enslaved people. It talks about the challenges that they faced in being enslaved during that time. It talks about George Mason's own fraught relationship about the system of slavery and whether or not it would ultimately destroy the Union. And all of that is happening in a sculptural work on our campus. So
Mhm.
I love that we are able to confront these big questions and ask our students to confront those questions on a daily basis. This is in the middle of campus. Students pass by it multiple times a day. So that's one very specific example of the type of work that our faculty do at George Mason that really helps students to think very critically and deeply about big questions.
Mhm. I know years ago, we at Diverse were working with the groups called, I think it was called Study Abroad, and their president or director at the time was very interested in getting um, primarily African American students, but also other students of color into global education. And by that, I'm talking about study abroad programs. So you talked about the demographics of George Mason, the how diverse it is, and a lot of first gen students, parents are immigrants. George Mason has put a lot of focus on global education. So uh, for for the underrepresented students on campus, can you talk about some of the programs that you have for overseas that you oversee, or that you know of for international programs, and how are you guys getting students to study abroad?
Yeah, so I think you worked with Andrew Gordon and Diversity Abroad. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I remember them. Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
His
yes,
name I don't remember, but Diversity Abroad. Yes, absolutely.
yes, yes. So Andrew and I came into the field of international education at exactly the same time. And
Hmm.
we've been working together ever since. And Diversity Abroad has gone from being a two-person operation
Wow.
that he founded to a full-fledged nonprofit organization that is doing this same work that you mentioned about making sure that diverse students have access to the information, the funding, and the opportunities that they need in international education. So I'm so thrilled that Andrew and I have really come up together in the field. So I'm going to go back a little bit more to
Hmm.
explain how I got into international education in the first place, because I think it really speaks to some of the challenges that students are still facing today. So I'm from San Bernardino, California. which is about an hour east of Los Angeles.
Mhm.
And even though it was a very, very sunny place, not far from the beach, it wasn't necessarily a place where people thought about what was going on outside of the borders of the city.
Right.
And I really was always very curious about other countries and other places and foreign languages. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about what was I going to do when I graduated from high school and how could I visit other countries and learn about other cultures. So I went to Stanford University, and at Stanford, I majored in international relations because study abroad was required. You
Mhm.
couldn't get around study abroad if you were an IR major. My
Okay.
parents were very nervous about me studying abroad. They didn't want me to leave the country. They were afraid that I would experience racism in another country. And so I knew they wouldn't let me go abroad unless it was required. So I went to Paris, and it changed my life. And I never looked back. One of the things that was really insightful for me in Paris was that as a Black woman, I was not constantly followed around in stores as I
Mhm.
was in the United States. And I started to realize that, wait a second, no one's relating to me in a negative way because I'm Black here. And that was just eye-opening. I had never had that experience because I had never left the United States. And it
Mhm.
felt so liberating, and it felt so exciting to be in a place where my identity was not a marker of shame or something that people associated with negative stereotypes.
Mhm.
So I really wanted to do that kind of thing again, and I really wanted to make it part of my career. But I also noticed that there were very few Black students on my program, in other programs, and I wondered why that was. Why is it that more Black students in particular don't do this? You know, it's a chance to go and feel like a real person, who's not just, discriminated against all the time.
Mhm.
So I went to graduate school, I studied art history, and then I went to Germany for a year, and I was an exchange student there. I loved being an exchange student, but my experience in Germany was a lot harder than France. I experienced lots of racism in Germany, lots of discrimination, and I felt kind of taken off guard because I had such a great experience in Paris. But
Mhm.
I also, at that time, read the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, Angela Davis, and others who had lived in Germany, and they wrote about their experience, that cognitive dissonance of being overseas, but being in a place that doesn't really want you there.
Right.
And so it got me to thinking about that other piece of being Black, and abroad. So when I came back to the United States and started working in the field, I made it my mission to make sure that there were ways that other students could have these experiences. Other students from minoritized backgrounds would be able to go overseas, and follow their curiosities and their passions, and also to navigate all of these different cultural, issues and dynamics in different countries. I
Mhm.
did it all by myself. I didn't know what to expect when I went to France. I didn't know what to expect when I went to Germany. And so I didn't want students to be surprised. You're
Mhm.
not going to have, a rosy, perfect experience, wherever you go, but you can be prepared for it. And you can make sure that you have mentors available who you can consult if there's an issue. So
Right.
that's how I got into the field, in general. That's how I started working with NAFSA, and working at NAFIO, supporting HBCU students who wanted to study abroad. So when I got to Mason, Mason has so much diversity on its campus. It has a very international population. Students come to Mason because they want to study abroad at some point. So the challenge with those students is that they don't always have the means. They don't have the financial means to study abroad. So working in the fellowships office, a lot of the opportunities I was helping students to find was to help them achieve their goals and pursue their dreams of study abroad. And what I did as a faculty member was I served as their advisors.
Mhm.
So my parents had never left the country. They didn't understand how to help me if I encountered racism in another country, but I had been through that experience.
Mhm.
So I became an advisor to students when they went overseas, and if they had a problem, they knew they could always call me and we could talk through it. So a lot of my work at George Mason is helping students find the resources to study abroad, helping them actually go through the administrative process of going on the program, getting on that plane, and then helping them not only to be successful while they're there, but to think about what do they do when they come back? What do you do with that experience? And how do you make sure that it multiplies and others have that opportunity?
Gotcha. Great answer. You answered about 5 questions that I had in just that response. Um, and I want to stay on that topic. So what initiatives or courses do you think are essential for students to develop a, cross-cultural understanding and global awareness, to prepare them to go internationally, if you will?
That's a great question. And it's a big question. So it really depends on your particular academic interest. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're an engineering student, you're going to need to take some different courses than if you are an art history major.
Right.
But language fluency and an interest in foreign languages is critical. If you want to fully immerse yourself in another culture, you need to be able to speak the language. So the fundamental basis of what I did when I ran the fellowships office was to help students get on the path to language fluency. So even if you're a physics major, there are physicists all over the world, and you want to be able to communicate with them in their language.
Mm-hmm.
So any major can and should study a foreign language. So that's, to me, the first step is to really be able to communicate. You need to study a foreign language. Even if you didn't have access to foreign language courses in high school, there are usually beginning level languages that you can take in college. And I know lots of people who are now fluent in languages as professionals who didn't start until college. So don't think that you're too late if you weren't able to take language courses, foreign language courses in high school. So foreign language is really important. Then I think it's important for students to take courses in different geographic regions. So sometimes we call that area studies. I'm like African studies is an area studies discipline, so that you really start to develop an awareness and an area of expertise in a particular geographic region. So that can be driven again by your intellectual curiosity. I have students who love anime and are very interested in Japan. So they should study Japanese. They should learn about Japanese history through courses. All of that to help you prepare for one day when you can go and study in Japan. I have students who are very interested in Latin America, particularly our students who are interested in the Black experience, since Brazil has the largest
Mm-hmm.
population of African descended people outside of the continent. So those students need to study Portuguese. They need to study Brazilian history. They need to understand the broader history of Latin America and the transatlantic slave trade. So I love to advise students at that level because I like to listen to them articulate what their interest is and then tell them based on what they want to do, what types of courses they should take, what types of research they should be doing, what faculty on our campus are also interested in the same things that they should connect to. So it's very individualized. And that's why I love being an advisor, because I can really help tailor each student's questions and interest to the coursework.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, gosh, you got my mind was going 20 different places there in your response. Um, in the current climate that we're in, and I'm talking about this anti-DEI climate, what are the most pressing issues for institutions like George Mason when it comes to trying to advance both DEI and global learning initiatives?
Mm, that's such a great question. George Mason University graduates students who are prepared
Mm,
for the world. And you can't be successful as a citizen, as a professional, as a thinker and a contributor to any community if you don't understand how to be empathetic and humble, if you don't understand how to communicate with people who don't come from exactly the same background as you, and if you aren't curious about how other people have developed their own sets of values and thinking. And that's really what our focus is in my program in African and African American studies, and what I do as an international educator, and what the 10,000 NAFSA members are doing every day is really
Mhm.
trying to build that muscle for students to be able to not reflexively and reactively say, oh, I don't understand that language, so there's nothing that culture has to offer. Absolutely not. We want people to open their minds and to be curious and to ask really good questions.
Mhm.
So that those values are the same in African American studies and in international education. And I think that's one thing that Mason really embraces, is that we're not just preparing students to be successful contributors in Virginia, we're preparing them to be successful in the world. And we also recognize that the world is in Virginia. So
Mhm.
for our students to be able to be at the forefront of their fields and also kind individuals who contribute to communities, they need to have a comprehensive understanding of intercultural competency.
Gotcha. Um, you mentioned NASFA, that NAFSA, gosh, I'm getting tongue-tied, NAFSA. So that's actually it's a good segue to NAFSA. So you've recently been named president of NAFSA. So can you share, what your vision is for NASPA? What are your top priorities during your term?
Yes, so I've actually been the president of NAFSA for the last 3 years,
Okay.
and my term is ending at the end of this year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yes, and I've been on the board for 8 years.
Hmm.
So this is really a great time for me to start to think about my legacy as
Hmm.
board chair. My priority in coming in on the board and as president has been to make sure that the association is as strong as it possibly can be to serve our members. The members are the backbone of NAFSA. They're the ones in the field, on the ground, doing the hard work with the students, faculty, and staff every day. So being a board chair means setting aside my own particular areas of expertise to think about the big picture of the field and of the association itself. So
Hmm.
I've really been focused on that for the last 3 years. We are so fortunate that we have a relatively new-ish CEO who's joined us about 18 months ago, Dr. Fanta Av, who
Hmm.
has been a longtime international educator. She spent her entire higher education career at American University and is simply beloved by students and other NAFSANs. And so she has electrified the field with her expertise, with her personality, and with her deep connections in the field. And so this is really a new era for the association, because we've really been able to expand our reach to members who didn't always think that membership was something that they were maximizing, to different
Hmm.
partners in other countries. So I'm really proud that we were able to recruit Fanta and that she accepted this challenge to join us as the CEO. And the reason why I love working with Fanta and I love working with the NAFSA staff is because fundamentally their commitment is to expanding the field of international education. The field kind of started after World War II and was really built around the ideas of mutual understanding, but it was very exclusive. So if you couldn't afford to study abroad, if
Right.
you didn't come from one of the Ivy League schools, then it was very hard for you to have an international experience. And
Hmm.
by and large, our field really wants to go in a new direction. We know that the students who least understand international education are the ones who need it the most.
Yeah.
So providing access to those students, to those institutions, and to those administrators and faculty to international education has been my top priority as board chair. And I'm really pleased as I look back over the last 3 years as chair and 8 as a board member, that we have come quite a long way in terms of how we think about expanding access to the field.
Yeah. As we know, NAFSA is obviously, deeply involved with promoting international education and exchange. And you just mentioned your tenure has been the past 3 years. So you were right smack dab in the middle of COVID. So um, in the wake of that, what effect did that have on international education? Like, were there new lessons learned and you guys have come out of it better?
Yes,
That?
there was a lot that we had to learn very quickly
Mhm.
coming out of COVID. The field was nearly devastated by COVID, as you can imagine. If mobility has stopped, that is the backbone of the field, is
Mm.
moving people from place to place and having them travel. So not being able to travel, policies that made it difficult for international students to come and study in the United States, combined with a lockdown, meant that we had to pivot quickly. So our colleagues
Mhm.
are so nimble, and I'm so in awe in the ways in which our international educators had to work to get students home. That was a big task.
Oh,
We had
yeah.
so there are students who were overseas when the lockdowns began, and they had to be brought home.
Mm.
So many of our NAFSAs didn't sleep for days and weeks and months in trying to work to get these students home safely and then to find places for them when they got back. And then what do you do when it's completely uncertain as to when travel will be able to resume? So students plan their international education experiences sometimes years in advance. So how do you pivot if you've always planned to spend your junior year abroad and now everything is shut down and the programs are canceled? What do you do if you've made those plans and now you can't participate? So that was a lot of what people had to do at the beginning. And
Mm.
then once that was more settled down, people had to start to think about, what do we do next? So
Mhm.
a lot of my colleagues really leaned into online learning and online exchange and virtual exchange and ways that we could use these technological platforms to connect. It's not the same as being in the country. It's not the same as being with a host family or being able to sit and have a meal with someone, but it was the best that we could do under the circumstances. And our members did that, and they did it well. So a lot of lessons were learned from the pivot to online learning, and that really helped us to see the possibilities.
Mhm.
So there are lots of ways that we have integrated online learning and international and virtual exchange into our regular practice. Not every orientation needs to be in person.
Mm.
So we can do virtual orientations. I do virtual diversity trainings for resident directors who are living in other countries and want to learn more about the diversity issues in the United States. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I had to travel to each of those sites to
Right.
be there in person. So there's a lot that we learned that helped us to pivot, and it's really exciting to see how we've taken what was a very challenging situation for everyone and made it took the best from it and
Mm.
made it so that we could actually use it to help more students.
Yeah. For the folks in our audience who are at other institutions and thinking about international opportunities, not just for students but also for faculty. But what steps can institutions take to really, I would say, highlight, international education, but particularly, what can they do to ensure that students from underrepresented groups have greater access to the opportunities?
That's another great question. I think it's everyone's job as a faculty member to keep an eye out for those students and to really make sure that those students understand that everything that's offered at the university is for them.
Mm.
A lot of
Mhm.
students I meet say study abroad isn't for me. It's not for people like me. It's for white students. It's for rich students. It's for foreign language students. But study abroad is for everyone. And there is a program and a country and an area of study that you can pursue no matter what your interests are. So for faculty to understand that is the first big step. And most college campuses have either a study abroad office or an advisor on their campus. And it's really that person's job to advise the student on how they can study abroad. So a lot of times faculty feel like, oh, I've got to deliver content in the classroom. I've got to grade papers. How can I also then tell students where to go? All you have to do is to know where that office is on campus and know who that person is, and they can usually take it from there. So it's a really low bar for faculty in terms of their ability to assist students. The real thing that they can do in the classroom is to talk about all the international dimensions of their field and get students interested in international education from their perspective. I'm an art historian. Art history is by nature an international field. Museums are global. They're everywhere in the world. There are museums. And back in the 19th century, before the advent of photography, the only way to view art was to travel to go see it. Right. So there's a lot about my discipline that is inherently internationalized, but as a faculty member, I just need to highlight that to my students. And if I see that they're interested, or even if they're not, they don't think they need to know this, I tell them where the study abroad office is and what kinds of opportunities are available.
Yeah. When we talk about study abroad, I think most of us are just so American centric, if you will. We're talking about typically, faculty and students going abroad. But it also comes back the other way. We have scholars and students that come to the U.S. So, but this is a challenging time coming to the U.S. So, when we look at U.S. immigration policy, so how is NAFSA addressing those challenges, and what advocacy efforts are underway for those groups of people?
Yes. So NAFSA has one of the best public policy teams in the association world in Washington, D.C. So we have individuals who have spent their entire career studying immigration policy and advise our members on how to navigate these challenges. As you said, we're sending students overseas, but we're also receiving international students. And international students are a several $million contribution to the United States and local economies. In addition to their contributions in the classroom, their contributions to the culture of the university and in their communities. So we want as many international students to come and study in the United States as possible. To do that, we need a robust visa processing system to help students go through the visa process. It needs to be fair. Right now, students from African countries have much higher visa denial rates, and that's something that we are paying attention to and working on. We want to see the diversity of the world in our international students, just as we want the diversity of American students to be represented overseas. Right. So certainly there are challenges in our current environment with anti-immigrant sentiments that give people pause about whether or not the United States is a welcoming place. But our campuses love international students. We want them to come and study in the United States. So NAFSA does quite a bit of work in that public policy realm, working on meeting with members of Congress, bringing our members to meet members of Congress and to talk about the contributions that international students have made to their campuses, but also to the economy in general. So that way they're aware when they're making policy that these are real people who are making real contributions. So there's a lot of different ways in which our public policy team works very hard to make sure that our members are aware of movement in public policy, and that our representatives in Congress understand the importance of international education as a field in our higher education.
Okay. We are obviously getting close to the end here, past time, but there's a couple more questions. You've had a distinguished career so far, obviously in higher ed and internationally. Um, what's what's your motivation? What's driving you to this work?
Mm, wow. Um, I love colleges.
Oh,
I love higher education. I loved being a student. I
hmm.
still consider myself a student and try to learn new things all the time. And I love the very uniqueness of the American higher education system that can take someone like me who came from, a solidly middle class background, and I went to Stanford and Duke, and then was able to become a tenured professor at George Mason University, being the daughter of parents who lived under Jim Crow segregation in the American South. They never thought that what was not possible for them would be possible for me. And that's something that's very special about higher education in the United States. So I'm motivated by my experiences, by the trials and tribulations that I had as a student trying to navigate higher education and not really understanding how it worked. I really want other students to have a better experience, and I really want them to succeed and to be able to follow their dreams. And I have so many students now, having been an educator for 25 years, who are so successful in their careers, who stay in touch with me, who tell me about all of their personal triumphs in their lives. And there's nothing better than getting that postcard or email from a student saying, "Hey, I just graduated from law school," or "Guess what? Now I'm a foreign service officer."
Mm-hmm.
That's really, it's inspiring, it's motivating, and there's just nothing better than building those personal relationships where you see the power of higher education and its effect on students.
Yeah. So, at the end of your day, when you're not doing the work for NAFSA or George Mason or research or study, what does LaNitra do? How do you unwind from this work?
Okay, so I have to get better at that, because my job is all encompassing, in mostly good ways. But I have a beautiful family. I have a husband of 20 years. I have two boys, ages 7 and 12, who keep me very busy and very humble.
Yeah.
Um, so I spend a lot of time with my family, and we love to travel.
Okay.
So my boys have been to 5 of 7 continents, and they are very comfortable wherever they go in making friends in the local area. So we love to go to museums. We love to visit new places and learn about new cultures and traditions. And so whenever we have a vacation time, we usually plan an international trip. So that's really, it's something that I look forward to. And after work, I talk with my husband and we plan a trip. Recently, we went to New Zealand. My husband and I went by ourselves to New Zealand. We left our kids for the first time and went to New Zealand. It was phenomenal. So I learned so much in New Zealand. I had never been there before. I was there partially with NAFSA for 3 weeks, and then I traveled with my husband. And it was just fascinating to meet so many new people in a new place. So
Mhm.
I just like to stay curious and learn new things and travel.
All right. So for as we close here, for those who are listening who now have an interest in international education or leading global initiatives, what advice would you give them, especially women and people of color who are interested in this work?
Mm. So I will say that NAFSA as an association is a good first place to start,
Okay.
because it's such a large association, and it's comprehensive in terms of how it looks at internationalization. So if you're interested in working with international students, if you're interested in study abroad, if you're interested in developing programs, there's a place for you in NAFSA. And then I'll also say that diversity abroad, as in my work with Andrew Gordon,
Mhm.
they are also doing phenomenal work to really help people think more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and its intersection in international education. So they have an extensive network of faculty, of affinity groups, and different resources that can really help you to get started. And then I'll give one final shout out to Instagram platforms.
Okay.
I worked with students who created a platform called Fulbright Noir. It was a group of Fulbrighters who were Black Fulbrighters who really wanted to talk more about the issues that they were facing as Black students abroad. And they created an Instagram platform called Fulbright Noir. And then many other affinity group platforms were founded after that. And they're on Instagram. So anybody can go on there and learn about different students' experience in all the places where Fulbright is offered. And I'm so proud of those students for taking the initiative, because that is open access. That's open to anybody. If you're 10 years old or if you're 100, you can go and learn about those experiences through those Instagram platforms.
I'm smiling because I saw that Fulbright Noir in the photo you sent. You had a T-shirt on, and I was going to share that with our publisher, my mentor, because she was a Fulbright student in Spain after her undergraduate year. So I was going to ask you, I said, "You got this T-shirt? This looks cool. You need to get one." So
yes, Fulbright Noir has they have developed quite a robust platform. They have lots of events where people talk about their experiences, and they're very open. So I hope that they're able to check it out, because it's really been a great way to bring this community together.
Yeah, we have a meeting together in like 2 hours, so I'm definitely going to ask her about it. Okay, Dr. Berger, thank you very much for your time. I wish we had more. I mean, I think I didn't even ask you half the things I wanted to talk about. I really wanted to get into social justice, but time just flew. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2 down the road. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ralph. It was a pleasure to talk to you.